And let's bring in criminal defense attorney and former Manhattan District Attorney Jeremy Saland and NBC News legal analyst, civil litigator, and former sex crimes prosecutor Kristen Givens-Fedden. So, Jeremy, I do want to start with you. That was fascinating to hear, whether this is sequential or whether it's because Cassie is pregnant here. But we did see the defense set out to break down the prosecution's case that Cassie was not a willing participant in all this. Do you think that they managed to do that with her?
Yeah, I mean, there were some good hits and there were some misses. And whatever she's going to say, the prosecution is going to turn around and have an answer for it. So, for example, you heard something about, did you cancel your concert, your tour because of the $20 million? No, and a great response and a powerful one. It was almost set up wrongly for the defense was, no, I would have done that anyway to get rid of these freak-offs and never have to do them. That's some powerful things to say. But by default, in terms of that organization, they had to get her on the stand. You do wonder if they came out a little bit too strong because everything else may get a little mundane, if that's even an appropriate term here. But they had to come out with that evidence because of the timing, and it's very powerful to captivate, to set the stage and the foundation. But did they really poke the holes in her that they needed to? This isn't 1980s or 1950s where, all of a sudden you say the woman came back and she must be, must love him. You could have different events in different times. It's a marathon. That trial's a marathon. That relationship's a marathon. Mile 1 may be different than mile 2 and mile 7. I don't think they did the job they needed to do, but there's more ahead, meaning the defense didn't poke the holes they needed.
And Kristen, again, I mean, so much of this is about sex trafficking, and this is about racketeering, and yet a lot of focus over the last couple of days has been about this rape allegation that Cassie made. There's some discrepancies there. Do you think that like is a tangent here, or are we going to hear more about that?
We may hear more about it, but I do think it is a tangent. Just like Jeremy said, the interesting thing about that 2018 rape claim is that is exactly what was the core of the civil case. And that's really what broke open the broader federal case that we're here today to see. And I think one of the things that's really interesting here is what the defense is doing is what we often see in these types of cases involving these powerful men. They're coming through every message, as Jeremy was talking about, every post-incident interaction to really suggest that Cassie was a willing participant, but what this ignores is the trauma and the coercion. Survivors often stay in contact with their abusers due to fear, due to psychological dependency, or even hope or change. And the real legal question here is, was consent freely given, or was it coerced through power, through manipulation, through fear? And I couldn't agree more with Jeremy in that the defense, they had some great punches, but they didn't poke the holes that they needed to through Cassie.
Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad you brought up the trauma of all this. We have a therapist that we're going to be talking to right after this, because that is a very important conversation. Jeremy, I do want to ask you today about seeing Combs all day, very involved with his legal teams, passing notes, talking to them during cross-examination to the point that other people could hear him. Like, is that unusual?
Every case is unique, but it's certainly not atypical. I had a trial recently where a guy had a gun in a car and he wanted me to pick a particular juror. I adamantly did not want to. The judge actually got involved to try to explain why it was a bad juror, although not exactly, because he can't do that. People who are accused of crimes, they say things and they want things their way and they want to take a stand and they want their point across. That doesn't mean it's right. I don't tell my physician how to take care of my body, my surgeon on what to do next. I may have input because I know what happened to me. But in that courtroom, people act ways they're not normally going to act. But in terms of Sean Combs, remember, he's a guy who was always in control. And the man who's in control wants you to do it the way he wants you to do it, but it doesn't mean it's going to be right.
Yeah, I can't imagine having a client that at one point was a billionaire. Kristen, like you have the experience of prosecuting Bill Cosby, if I understand this correctly. Like, if you can give me a little bit of context here, like, does this trial correlate to that one? Are there similarities that are very striking to you?
Absolutely. In this case, we see very powerful men, Bill Cosby, Sean Puffy Combs, accused of exploiting that power over time, using that status, using that money, using that manipulation to control and silence women. right? That's exactly what we saw with Bill Cosby. Andrea Constand reported shortly after she was assaulted. And the legal strategy we used in that particular case was we brought in corroborating witnesses. We showed that pattern of that calculated behavior. And what we had to do is we had to dismantle the idea of consent when there's that power imbalance. And that is exactly correlated. And what we see in this particular case, in this Diddy case, we are seeing prosecutors really do the same thing. They're using multiple voices to illustrate that narrative, right? They're using Cassie and talking about the 2018 rape, but then they're also going throughout to show how even though they were in a quote unquote relationship, it was really defined by an inappropriate coercion, power manipulation, and rape. They're also bringing in that hotel manager, the male escort, and Dawn Rashad as well to build out that narrative of predation. And let's not forget the infamous surveillance video, which also shows how he beat her up. So not only is the jury able to hear it and visualize it through witness testimony, but they're also able to see it. So in both of those cases, I can see the prosecutors doing exactly what we did in the Cosby case, which was to show through corroborating witnesses that narrative, that dynamic, that imbalance, to show that, in fact, there absolutely was no consent.
Yeah, a glimpse at what we may see going forward. Jeremy Saland and Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, thank you so much for all of that analysis. And turning now to, after 18 hours of testimony, Cassie Ventura is off the stand